Welcome to the Prison Professors Podcast. We serve people who face challenges with prosecution, sentencing, and prison. My co-founders are Sean Hopwood and Justin Paperny. My name is Michael Santos. We create digital content and our team offers individual consulting services. We also assist agencies that want to improve outcomes. To learn how we can help you, text the word Prison Pro to 44222. Again, text Prison Pro to 44222 and get our free brochure. You can also visit us at prisonprofessors.com or contact Justin at 818-424-2220. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Send confirmation that you reviewed our podcast and we'll send you a free digital book. Stay tuned for a 20 to 30-minute episode of Prison Professors. Welcome to Prison Professors. I am Michael Santos, and today I get to introduce you to somebody who is a true role model, not only to me, but I think to thousands of people who are either going into the criminal justice system or who are in the criminal justice system and are thinking about what is the best possible outcome. Chris Poulos is the best possible outcome. He is going to tell us his story of moving through struggle and then finding himself while he was locked up inside of the Maine state prison system, or rather the federal prison system, I think, and then what he did while he was inside to transition into society to the highest levels of success. So Chris, welcome to our program. Could you please just give our audience the details that led you into the criminal justice system?
Sure. Thank you very much, Michael. It's wonderful to be on the program, and thank you for all the work you're doing to help people who are incarcerated or who may be incarcerated or before have been incarcerated. So appreciate it. My own background is, in some ways I had a lot of privileges when I was growing up, and in some ways I had a lot of challenges. My mom was a single mother, and she did her very best to raise me and did a wonderful job. But I always found myself drawn to whatever I wasn't supposed to do, which I don't think is abnormal for children or teenagers. But unfortunately, myself and many others who are listening to this particular program took that to a bit of an extreme. And the way my behavior really manifested was in addiction to various substances, so alcohol and drugs, various different drugs. And what I found was I could find some relief. I didn't feel comfortable in my own skin as a teenager. And when I put alcohol and drugs into my system, I felt some relief. And that really actually served me pretty well for a while. It provided me some relief. And for about 10 years, that worked for me. And when I got to age 24, I reached a point where substances were no longer relieving anxiety or depression or helping me with relationships. In fact, the substances were making my life much worse. And I made a decision to get help when I was 24 years old. And what happened was my major interaction with the criminal justice system followed several different less severe interactions with the criminal justice system. And I think that's really important to note is that, when I was arrested when I was 15, when I was arrested when I was 18, when I was arrested when I was 20, any one of those opportunities would have been a perfect time for law enforcement, for an attorney, for a mentor to attempt to direct me towards help, direct me towards services, divert me from jail. But that did not happen. And my criminal activity and my addiction continued to progress. And several months into my recovery, actually, when I got sober at age 24, I was indicted on 5 federal felony charges. And that began my journey in recovery, nonetheless, through the federal system.
So tell us about what it was like going into the federal system at a young age and, what you did to prepare for that lengthy journey while you were going inside.
It was, it was scary. I admit that it was scary when I got to talk with a guy named Walter who had done some federal prison time, and he told me that I would likely have to go behind the wall at the United States Penitentiary, Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Even if I was, low or minimum security, I'd have to, at least for a little while, start behind the wall. And I kind of laughed and said, I don't think so. I don't think they would put me back there because I'm a low security risk. And he said, okay, but they very well may. And it turned out, I'll always actually remember when I thought I was going to the prison camp, and which I eventually did, but pulling up the big hill at the classic big house, USP Lewisburg, and realizing that I was not going to the prison camp, but I was going behind the wall and into a transit type unit, which was essentially like the whole. It was an abandoned hospital wing within the penitentiary, and I admit I was scared.
It can be a scary thought going behind those 40-foot walls with the gun towers and the medieval building and people yelling at you as you step into that place. I have some fond memories of going to Lewisburg.
Right. Especially when I thought I saw the prison camp, which of course it's not wonderful, but at least in a prison camp, you don't have to worry about your physical safety on a daily basis. You don't have to worry about stepping on someone's toe and having it turn into a major altercation, possibly, generally speaking, at least. And so, what happened was, though, I eventually, and I had to go to some places and that were high security. I was in NBC Brooklyn for a while, and then briefly behind the wall at Lewisburg. And what I did, to kind of make it through those situations with some degree of grace and peace, and was just really focus on immediately just trying to stay well, get well, focus on my own business, not worry about what other people were into. And throughout, regardless of the security level that I was at while I was incarcerated, and fortunately I did get to do a bunch of my time at a camp. What happened was I was attracted to the people who were on the right path for the first time in my life. And I think that's what's really important, is that in any prison unit, any jail unit, any social group, really, any group of humans, there's going to be some people who are still, we'll speak specifically to prison, there's going to be some people who are still doing the exact same things that landed us in prison. And then there's another group of people who treat their mind, body, and souls as our temples. And I had never really been exposed to a group of people like that, or at least I had never been open to learning from people like that. And what I found was, I think part of it was being in recovery from addiction and no longer being kind of on that endless cycle of seeking substances, was that I started to become attracted to these guys who stood up straight. They were in great shape, sometimes even smiled walking around the prison. And I became teachable for the first time in my life. And what I found was these men, many of whom had been incarcerated for 10, 20, 30 years, they had a regimen. Every day they had a routine, they exercised, they taught me what to put into my body and not to poison my body, not to poison my mind or my soul. And that was something that was really amazing for me. And the most simple example I can think of was I was really overweight when I got to prison. Despite my addiction, I still managed to be very overweight. And there was, a guy who offered to be my physical trainer for free in prison. And he, gently suggested that maybe I don't need to put squeezed cheese on my nachos. It started with something as simple and obvious to me now as that, but I didn't know what to put in my body and what not.
You said you were overweight, Chris. Give us a visual of that. How tall are you and how much did you weigh?
I'm 6 feet tall and I weighed about 250 pounds. But here's the thing is I weighed 250, but I could not even bench press 100 pounds at 250. So I was literally essentially, I had over 40% body fat. It was out of control. So, obese, but 250 pounds.
So you started making some decisions inside that would improve that health.
I did. It started with, simple steps. And that's one thing I would encourage, because we're going to, everybody to this day, I take, probably 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so the simple steps, and not just, making a decision. It started with just walking. Every day I made sure I would walk around the compound a little bit and not miss a day. And then about a month later, I added weight training. And then a couple months after that, I started to work in changes to my diet. And fast forward a couple of years later, I'm, 80 pounds lighter and, doing push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, bench pressing hundreds of pounds, and in the best physical condition and mental condition of my life.
And that adjustment pattern really not only helped you through prison, but it set you on a pathway for enormous success upon your release and in your professional life, which I'm looking forward to sharing with our audience. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about how that adjustment in prison set you up for the life you would lead when you return to society?
Sure. So I think that we all have passions. We all have dreams. And what happened was during my active addiction and during, periods of homelessness that I experienced and trauma that I experienced during my teenage years and early 20s, I really, I kind of was, I don't know if I forfeited or gave away or was at least, certainly separated to a major degree from my own dreams and aspirations. And I used to talk about how I wanted to be an attorney and talk about how I wanted to do things in the community and help my family and stuff, but I couldn't quite get there. And, making those the transformation that I did in prison, and before and after, and really becoming, to put it so simply, if listeners can take one thing away from my entire message, is that I became teachable for the first time in my life. I became teachable, and I began to listen, to read, to research, to follow advice, to investigate things before making my mind up, and to take suggestions from people. And that's what finally allowed my dreams, my visions, to turn into an actual plan and then begin to manifest. That advice right there, Chris, I just want to hammer home for many of our listeners who are either going into the prison system, in the jail system, or in prison right now. The reality is they're always hearing a message that the best way to serve time is to forget about the outside world and focus on their time inside, because they say you can't do anything about what's going on outside. But what I just heard from Chris Poulos is to reject that message and open your mind up to being teachable, is what he said, and thinking about what the best possible outcome is, and then sowing seeds that will get you there. We heard that he did that not only with his health, but with his fitness as well. And as you will learn more by continuing to listen to his amazing and inspiring story, it went on to him achieving extraordinary results. So I just wanted to interrupt you to pound that point home for our audience, and I'd love it if you would continue, Chris. Sure. So I eventually, of course, did make it home. My dream was to practice law. When I was a kid, my grandfather was actually my mom's stepdad, so I guess technically my step-grandfather, but he really helped raise me in a substantial way. And he was an attorney, and I used to read the cases, fascinating stories of people's lives. That's what cases are, simply stories of people's lives at usually their most trying times. And I used to read the cases, and I dreamed of being an attorney, but of course I got too sick, and I started to make bad decisions in connection with my addiction, and that goal became unrealistic, obviously, during my teenage years and early 20s. And then what re-sparked that goal was, some of the injustices that I witnessed in the criminal justice system during my incarceration. and some of the ways that I benefited as a result of my own privilege to some degree, just as a white male and having some financial resources, not a lot, but I had enough to get a private attorney. And in my case, that made a huge difference. And it really bothered me that just because I had a good attorney, simply because of that, I ended up with a much different experience than I likely would have otherwise in the criminal justice system. And namely, what happened was, as soon as I got a really expensive attorney, I was let out on bail right away. When the court-appointed attorney told me there was no way, there's absolutely no way I was getting out on bail. And that bothered me, that many of the people had to stay behind in jail and while they were waiting for trial, like I was, just because they did not have the resources that I did. And what happened that day was a passion, a fire, a purpose was born within me. And what I've found is that once we find our fire, once we find our passion, once we find our why, the how can become a lot more manageable. And I was just speaking at a prison a couple weeks ago now, actually, and we were talking about that and how, finding your why, whether it's family, that your children, a social justice thing you're interested in, whatever it may be. Once we find that why, the how becomes more manageable. And so I got home, and my dream to become an attorney really, really cranked up. And I had taken some college classes before prison, and I managed to fill out the financial aid forms. And that's something it's really important for people listening to know, is that chances are you're not prohibited from federal financial aid. Even if you have a felony conviction, it's a very narrow group that's currently still prohibited. So please look into that before assuming you won't be able to get a scholarship or loans for college, because chances are you will be able to. And I was able to. So I was able to get into an undergraduate degree program. And of course, I found that, being a little older than when I first started college, and most importantly, being in recovery and no longer using drugs, no longer drinking alcohol, no longer breaking the law, as one may imagine, my achievements in school and my grades and everything else became a lot better because I was healthy now. And so I went and I applied to law school. Before I applied, I went and met with the dean, which was a pretty phenomenal experience for me. I'd never really even been into a law school, or certainly had never sat down and talked with a dean. And so I was really nervous, and I started to tell him about my background and my story. And he initially was very interested. He said that the school likes to have a really diverse student body and have, people that have overcome challenges in the student body. And so he had known that I had some challenges, but he didn't know what. And once I told him, that I had been incarcerated and that I had suffered from addiction, particularly that I had been incarcerated and still had a felony conviction, it was like a wall was built between us. And he was immediately incredibly hesitant to further entertain the idea of me attending the law school. He actually suggested other career paths. He said, maybe you could be a drug counselor, maybe you could do something in public policy, but the law is a very guarded profession, and I'm just not sure how the law will receive, the profession and the school will receive someone with your background. And so what I did, and this is really important, it was a pivotal moment in my life. My gut reaction was to say, screw you, and storm out of the room. But I didn't. Maybe the years of prison or the recovery under my belt let me pause for a minute. And what I did was, for the first time in my life, I think, I assertively and respectfully stood up for myself in an appropriate way. And I asked the dean, I said, "Dean, why didn't the judge give me a life sentence?" And of course, he said he wasn't sure, something to do with my background or the amount of drugs I had. And so I said, "So then, Dean, why are you giving me a life sentence here today?" Essentially by telling me that the law is not for me. And when I said that, the wall that had kind of been built instantly between us from me disclosing my background, it began to crumble a bit. It certainly didn't come tumbling down, but I think what happened was he started to reflect, essentially, internally, who was he to tell me that I can't? And ultimately, long story short, the admissions committee voted unanimously in my favor to admit me to the law school. And there were times when I was in prison and even after prison, and especially right after that conversation with him, when I thought, maybe it is delusional. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe it is impossible. Maybe the people who laughed at me when I brought up the idea were right. And but what I did was, and this is really, kind of like recovery and AA 101 is, or 12-step 101, more generally speaking, is I refused, I let go of contempt prior to investigation. And so instead of believing what people told me or what I had read on the internet or anything else, I decided to fully investigate whether I could someday go to law school and practice law. And it turns out it's possible. And there were other people, and that's when I connected with folks like Sean Hopwood, who's partners with Michael on this, with you, Michael, obviously, and I'm speaking mostly to the listeners now on this project. And, the dean that was so hesitant, this is important, I don't want to forget, he chaired the admissions committee. So he ultimately voted yes, but, thank God, right, that I didn't storm out of that meeting or kick a chair or quit.
Well, that's a lesson that I think all of our listeners need to learn, and they should be learning from people like you. And that is that we cannot really change our past behavior, but we can always choose how to respond to struggle and difficulty. And when we respond in measured ways that are consistent with the goals that we're striving to achieve, we just advance possibilities for success on real levels. I remember the first time I spoke with Chris Poulos, I think you were in your second year of law school at that time, and I was just getting out of prison. I think I'd been out of prison. I was in my first year of liberty. Right. And it was just such a thrill for me to talk with you and to hear and to start building this network of people that were succeeding after prison, because that inspired me to continue working that in ways that would inspire others in prison. And now you've come a long ways since then. Not only did you get into law school, but you completed law school and then went on to even higher levels of success, which I'd love you to tell our audience about. I'd love you to tell our audience about where you were working the first time I met you.
Sure. So I think that I was at the Office of National Drug Control Policy or the Sentencing Project. Yeah,
you were at the White House.
Right. So that what happened there was this is kind of it's really important, I think, to be just open to opportunities and receptive to what can come into our lives, while also not being fools, of course, and risking being taken advantage of, but really being open and receptive has provided me a lot of opportunities. And I found myself on a task force. The mayor of Portland, Maine had a task force on substance use and addiction in the city. And one day we had a guest named Michael Botticelli, who was the director of National Drug Control Policy for President Obama at the White House. And he came into the meeting and he openly shared that, he was in long-term recovery from addiction. He shared that he was gay and married to a partner. He had a partner who he was married to, his husband, and that he had been arrested and gone to jail for drinking and driving. And now he was in recovery for decades. And He was literally directing national drug control policy for President Obama. And meeting him and hearing him share openly and confidently about his own journey really changed my life. Because when we spoke last, Michael, I was actually still very private about my past. You probably remember I said, can you please just be careful what you put on the website? This is my professional career. And, that then hearing, seeing you be open, seeing Sean be open, seeing Director Botticelli be open, that, it really convinced me that, cost me what it may, the right thing to do on these issues for me is to be open. So I approached Director Botticelli after the talk, and I told him, when President Obama was elected, I was in federal prison, and what you said in that room today, your openness, your candor, and your story inspired me. And I said, I watched Obama get elected from federal prison. I'm in law school now, and I'd love to come to Washington sometime. I had no idea what I was asking for, but what that, grabbing him after the meeting, not literally, but, approaching him after the meeting privately and talking with him led to eventually being able to work full-time at the Office of National Drug Control Policy as a law student intern during law school, and having national security position clearance in order to do that, which was of course a huge process, and it was incredibly stressful. I mean, all this stuff is stressful. If we want to succeed, if we want to excel and thrive, it's likely going to be incredibly stressful. The whole thing was getting through that process. It looked like it was going to be a no for a long time, and ultimately it turned into a yes. And so I was able to, serve President Obama. Of course, I actually did have the opportunity to say hello to him and shake his hand and work with him on a daily basis. But I did see Director Botticelli regularly in our office, and it was truly a privilege of a lifetime, something I never dreamed possible, but that I remained open to. And I remain open to, opportunities that may come that, sometimes I shake my head thinking, how can it be real? From going up that hill, shackled from head to toe at Lewisburg, to, having federal marshals and Secret Service actually providing protection for us when they used to guard the public from us. It's pretty phenomenal.
A little bit on that, Chris, because one thing Chris spoke with us about is being open and transparent and authentic. And although I don't know what the case is for every individual, certainly in my case, it's been part of the journey to be open. And I have found many opportunities are much friendlier to me because I am open. You see, the reality is we all as human beings face struggle, and when we're open about it, people are more receptive to giving us a second chance and opening doors that few people would think are possible. That's what Chris did, and as a result of that, he was able to not only go through law school, not only graduate law school, but then begin working to shape public policy and shape the way that leaders might look at formerly incarcerated people and see what are the best possible outcomes. And this is the best type of advocacy, when we look at people and we disrupt their image of what can become of somebody who served time in prison. Instead of seeing us as living on the margins and lives of mediocrity and struggle, they see us as becoming fully functioning members, contributing members of society. And that's what Chris is. And maybe you could conclude this episode of Prison Professors by sharing with us how you are doing that today in your current career, now that you are a practicing attorney. Tell our audience what you're doing right now.
Sure. So my current job is executive director of the statewide reentry council in Washington State. So I'm out in the Pacific Northwest. Again, something I never thought I'd be doing. And I love it out here. I do wish it was a little bit more sunny, but I love the mountains. I love the ocean. I love the trees. And it's a wonderful fit. And so what I'm doing, and it's actually interesting timing on our call, because this Wednesday is my day after tomorrow is my Senate confirmation hearing for my position. I'm a political appointee with a term, which is still, that's kind of a trip for me to think about that. I just given everything, even with the White House under my belt, it was one thing to be an intern. I mean, and I'm not trying to minimize that in any way, but this is a whole different level of trust. And that's another thing, and it took years for me to regain the trust, but I slowly did it, and, made sure that my feet and my actions were in the right place, and, let people's perceptions of me catch up when they were ready to.
Wow.
And
that is really incredible.
So now I am doing this work, and what happened was a little over a year and a half ago, the Washington State Legislature recognized that they wanted to improve the success of people reentering and into communities and reintegrating into society following incarceration and other forms of justice system involvement. And they created this statewide reentry council. And the governor appointed 15 people from different walks of life and different careers, all connected somehow to reentry, to sit on this council. And the council and the director of the Washington Department of Commerce ultimately appointed me as the first full-time executive director of this council. For a term of 3 years.
Well, congratulations, Chris, and thank you so much for devoting your life to reforms that can improve outcomes for people in the prison system in the state of Washington. But the reality is your willingness to be open and transparent helps to influence leaders, policymakers, legislators from across the United States. You show that regardless of what bad decisions somebody has made, they can always move forward and live as a law-abiding, fully functioning member of society. We see it in you, and we are very grateful to you for sharing your inspiring story with Prison Professors. I am going to do what I can to link people to Chris's work. I will be looking for him online. I know that he's on Twitter, and I will certainly be linking to him on Twitter and anywhere else so that others can find him if they're looking to read more about somebody who has reinvented himself and not only did it for himself, but is now working towards reform that benefits so many others. Do you have any final words of wisdoms that you might want to share with people in our audience, Chris?
I think that I would, well, first of all, thank you again for your kind words and for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit about my background and our work. But, just to reiterate a couple key points is being willing to, being attracted to positive people. Maybe people need to even force yourself. It may seem unnatural to be attracted to people who are doing positive things. But we truly are who our friends are. We are who we hang out with. We are what we consume. And so, following people and following is the wrong word, taking direction and becoming teachable was just the most important thing that I've done. And then also not disqualifying ourselves from opportunities simply because we're afraid someone else will, has been really important to me, or because we're told that it's impossible, to make sure, is it really impossible? It's probably impossible for me to be an Olympic gymnast at this point in my life. Like, there are some limitations. I probably won't be an astronaut either. Maybe I could, maybe I couldn't. But, law and policy and politics, those all seemed things that were impossible, but they turned out to not be.
You show that we can overcome anything, and we are grateful to you for sharing your story. Remember that everything is possible. Open your mind up to be taught and just never stop pursuing the dreams that you may have had as a young person and got derailed by the criminal justice system. Just keep pushing forward, and then you'll be following the inspiring path of Chris Poulos. We'll be back tomorrow with another inspiring guest on the Prison Professors program. Thank you.